Hello and welcome to the Whispering Worlds channel. What would you do if the foundation of your most cherished relationship began to crumble? Could you forgive a betrayal or find the strength to let go? Dive into the lives of Mark and Olivia, a couple caught in a storm of broken trust and restless hearts. As they navigate heartbreak and self-discovery, they're faced with choices that will shape their futures forever. Would you fight to save a fractured marriage or walk away to rebuild your life? The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the white sand beaches of Golden Shores Resort. Olivia Bennett gazed out at the waves, their rhythmic crashing a stark contrast to the turbulence swirling within her. This trip, Mark had insisted, would be a chance for them to reconnect, to escape the monotony of their suburban routine. But as they strolled through the resort's opulent lobby, Olivia wasn't sure if a week in paradise could fix what had slowly unraveled over years. Mark walked beside her, his face lighting up as he admired the sleek marble floors and towering glass windows that framed the ocean view. "This place is incredible," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. He turned to Olivia, his expression hopeful. "What do you think?" "It's beautiful," she replied, her smile polite but distant. She knew Mark was trying. He had been trying for months, ever since that uncomfortable argument last fall when she'd said, without meaning to, that she felt suffocated. He'd promised they'd find their spark again, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental between them had shifted. The routine. Their days at the resort quickly fell into a predictable rhythm. In the mornings, Mark joined the early risers for fishing trips while Olivia signed up for yoga classes by the beach. Afternoons were spent lounging by the pool or exploring the resort's winding paths lined with tropical flowers. They shared polite conversations over dinner, but Olivia found herself retreating into her thoughts more often than not. One evening, as they sat at a table overlooking the ocean, Mark reached across and took her hand. "I feel like we've been so busy with activities that we haven't really talked," he said. "How are you feeling about everything?" Everything hung heavy in the air. Olivia hesitated, swirling her wine glass. "I'm fine," she said finally. The disappointment in Mark's eyes was subtle, but it was there. She could see the effort he was making and hated herself for not feeling more. A new distraction. The following day, as Olivia lounged by the pool with a book, a burst of laughter caught her attention. A small group of resort staff and guests were playing a game nearby, their energy infectious. Among them was Ryan, one of the resort's animators, who appeared to be leading the group in an exaggerated charades performance. Ryan was younger than Olivia by at least a decade, with a boyish charm and a perpetual grin that seemed to make everyone around him relax. When his eyes landed on her, he gave a playful bow. "You look like you could use a little fun," he called out. Olivia laughed despite herself. "I think I'll leave the acting to the professionals." "Suit yourself," Ryan said with a wink before diving back into the game. She watched him for a moment longer, her curiosity piqued by his carefree demeanor. There was something about him that felt effortless, subtle distances. By midweek, Olivia and Mark were drifting further into their separate activities. Mark seemed content with his fishing excursions and newfound friends among the other hobbyists. Olivia, meanwhile, had joined a painting class led by one of the resort staff. It was relaxing, a welcome distraction from the lingering weight of her thoughts. Ryan's presence grew more noticeable. He often seemed to appear wherever Olivia was, whether it was the pool bar or the yoga deck. Their interactions were casual, always in the context of group activities, but Olivia began to notice how easily he made her laugh. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed that. One evening, Mark suggested they take a sunset walk along the beach. Olivia agreed, though her mind wandered as he talked about his plans for the following day. The sunset was breathtaking, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but Olivia felt like a spectator in her own life, watching from a distance as time slipped away. A whisper of restlessness. As the week drew to a close, Olivia couldn't shake a sense of unease. She told herself it was just the thought of returning to their routine at home, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. Something about the resort, or perhaps the space it had given her to reflect, had stirred a restlessness she couldn't ignore. Late one night, Unable to sleep, she stepped out onto their villa's private balcony. The sound of the waves was soothing, a reminder of the vastness of the world beyond her carefully constructed life. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, wondering what it would take to feel truly alive again. The next morning, Olivia walked along the resort's meandering paths, shaded by palms and dotted with hibiscus flowers. Her steps were unhurried, but her thoughts raced. She was grateful for the illusion of peace the resort provided. Yet beneath the surface, her dissatisfaction simmered. The cracks in her marriage felt wider here, not smaller. Mark was a good man, steady, reliable, but the passion they once shared seemed like a distant memory. At breakfast, Mark was already seated at their table, poring over a brochure for another fishing excursion. His face lit up when she joined him. "Morning," he said, sliding the brochure toward her. "I thought I'd head out with the group again today. There's this spot they mentioned yesterday. Perfect for catching red snapper." Olivia forced a smile. "That sounds great. You've been enjoying yourself." "And you?" Mark asked, his tone hopeful. "What are you planning for the day?" "Maybe another yoga class or some reading by the pool," she said nonchalantly. "I might try the painting class later." Mark nodded, though his enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "That sounds nice." As they ate in relative silence, Olivia felt the familiar weight of their routine pressing down on her. They weren't fighting. They rarely did. But the lack of meaningful connection was undeniable. Ryan's charm. Later that afternoon, Olivia found herself back at the pool, sipping on a cold mojito and flipping through a magazine she had no real interest in. Ryan was nearby, hosting a game of trivia with a group of guests. His easy laughter rang out across the pool deck, drawing smiles and cheers from everyone around him. When the game ended, Ryan strolled over to the bar, grabbing a drink and catching Olivia's eye. He grinned as he approached. "Don't tell me you're hiding over here instead of joining the fun," he teased. Olivia chuckled. "I'm more of an observer." "An observer, huh? That's what everyone says before they realize they're a trivia master." "Is that so?" she replied, amused by his confidence. Ryan leaned on the bar, his expression playful. "You should join us next time. I bet you'd crush it. Or at least make it more interesting." Olivia smiled, feeling the warmth of his attention. "I'll think about it." Painting lessons. By mid-afternoon, Olivia joined the painting class she had mentioned to Mark. The instructor, a cheerful woman named Carla, encouraged the small group to let go of their inhibitions and enjoy the process of creation. Olivia found herself relaxing as she mixed colors and brushed them onto the canvas. Halfway through the session, Ryan appeared, carrying a tray of refreshments. "Art in action," he said, setting the drinks on a nearby table. "Mind if I take a look?" Olivia shrugged, gesturing to her half-finished painting. It was an abstract interpretation of the ocean, swirls of blue and green blending together in a chaotic but soothing pattern. "Not bad," Ryan said, tilting his head as he examined it. "Definitely better than I could do." "You're just saying that," Olivia said, though she appreciated the compliment. "No, really," he insisted. "You've got a good eye for color." Their conversation was light, peppered with laughter. Olivia felt herself relaxing in his presence, a welcome distraction from the heaviness she carried. Distance and proximity. That evening, Mark returned from his fishing trip with stories of the day's adventures. He was animated, recounting how one of the group members had nearly toppled into the water while reeling in a particularly stubborn fish. Olivia listened, nodding and smiling at the appropriate moments, but her mind wandered. "Are you sure you're okay?" Mark asked, his tone more serious now. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just tired." The painting class was a bit more intense than I expected. Mark seemed to accept her explanation, though a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Maybe tomorrow we can spend the day together. Explore the town or something." "Maybe," Olivia replied, though she wasn't sure she meant it. A new dynamic forms. The days continued in a similar rhythm. Olivia found herself drawn to the group activities Ryan hosted, her laughter coming more easily in his presence. Their interactions remained friendly, but there was an undeniable energy between them, one Olivia couldn't ignore. Mark, meanwhile, seemed oblivious. He was content in his routine, eager to share his experiences with her at the end of each day, even as she grew more distant. Olivia told herself it was harmless, that she was simply enjoying a vacation. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that she was treading dangerous ground. One evening, as she sat alone on the balcony, the moonlight casting silvery shadows across the resort grounds, Olivia found herself thinking about Ryan's laugh, his carefree attitude. She wondered if it was possible to feel that lighthearted again, or if she had already crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Olivia stood by the pool, the cool evening breeze brushing against her skin as the faint hum of music drifted from the resort's nightly entertainment. She held a glass of wine in her hand, swirling the ruby liquid absent-mindedly as she gazed at the illuminated water. The scene was serene, yet her mind churned with conflicting emotions. She hadn't intended to spend so much time around Ryan, but his energy was magnetic, a pull she hadn't felt in years. A shared moment. Enjoying the night? Ryan's voice cut through her reverie. Olivia turned to see him standing a few feet away, a relaxed grin on his face. He held a bottle of beer, his casual demeanor matching the laid-back charm he exuded. "It's beautiful," Olivia replied, gesturing to the pool and the star-studded sky above. "Peaceful. Peaceful, huh?" Ryan teased, taking a step closer. "I'd say it's a little too quiet for my taste." Olivia smiled despite herself. Not every moment has to be filled with excitement. "Fair point," Ryan admitted, leaning against a nearby railing. He glanced at her, his expression softer now. "But sometimes, the quiet moments are when you start to think too much." She laughed lightly, though his comment struck a nerve. "Is that your way of saying you don't like being alone with your thoughts?" Ryan shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I just prefer company." Their conversation meandered from light-hearted banter to deeper topics. Ryan shared snippets of his life, how he had ended up working at the resort after abandoning a corporate job he hated, his dreams of traveling the world, and his belief in living life in the moment. Olivia listened, intrigued by his perspective. His life seemed so free, unburdened by the responsibilities and compromises she had accepted as inevitable. As they talked, the space between them seemed to shrink, the faint tension in the air almost palpable. When Ryan reached out to brush a stray lock of hair from her face, Olivia's breath caught. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken possibilities. A line crossed. "I should go," Olivia said abruptly, stepping back. Her pulse quickened as guilt surged through her. "It's late." Ryan didn't push. He simply nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a beat longer than necessary. "Good night, Olivia." She hurried back to the villa, her mind racing. She hadn't done anything wrong, not technically, but the memory of Ryan's touch and the way it made her feel lingered, haunting her even as she slipped into bed beside Mark. A growing distance. The next day, Olivia tried to push the incident from her mind. She joined Mark for breakfast, listening as he outlined his plans for the day. He seemed cheerful, oblivious to the inner turmoil she was battling. "You should come with me today," Mark suggested. "The group's heading to a nearby island for snorkeling. It'll be fun." Olivia hesitated. "Maybe. I was thinking about trying another class." Mark's smile faltered for a moment before he nodded. "All right, if you change your mind, just let me know." As he left, Olivia felt a pang of guilt. Mark's attempts to include her were earnest, but they only highlighted how far apart they had drifted. She told herself she needed time to think, to sort through the confusion she felt, but deep down, she knew the truth. She was avoiding him, a dangerous invitation. Later that evening, Olivia found herself at the bar, nursing a cocktail as she watched the ebb and flow of guests mingling around her. Ryan appeared again, as if drawn to her presence. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, his tone light. "Didn't expect to be here," Olivia replied, forcing a smile. She was wary, unsure if she should even be speaking to him after the previous night. Ryan gestured to the seat beside her. "Mind if I join you?" She hesitated, then nodded. They fell into easy conversation, the tension from the night before seeming to dissipate. Ryan's charm was disarming, his humor a welcome distraction from the heaviness that had settled over her. "Come to the bonfire tonight," Ryan said suddenly. "It's small, just a few of the staff and some guests. Nothing official." Olivia knew she shouldn't. Spending more time with Ryan was dangerous. She could feel it in her gut. But the thought of sitting in the villa alone, waiting for Mark to return, felt unbearable. "I'll think about it," she said, though the answer was already forming in her mind. A spark ignites. That night, Olivia found herself standing on the beach, the bonfire crackling before her. Ryan was there, laughing with a small group of people, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. When he spotted her, his smile widened. "You made it," he said, stepping closer. "I guess I was curious," Olivia replied, her voice soft. As the night wore on, the group dwindled, leaving only Olivia and Ryan by the fire. Their conversation deepened, the world around them fading into the background. When Ryan leaned in, Olivia didn't pull away. His kiss was gentle at first, then more insistent, and she felt herself yielding, her resistance crumbling. When they finally pulled apart, Olivia's heart raced, a mix of exhilaration and dread. She knew she had crossed a line, one that couldn't be undone. And as she walked back to the villa alone, the weight of her actions pressed down on her, the spark that had ignited threatening to consume her entirely. Olivia woke the next morning to the golden light of the rising sun spilling through the curtains of the villa. Despite the serene beauty outside, her chest was tight with anxiety. Memories of the previous night, Ryan's kiss, the bonfire, the firelight dancing in his eyes, played on a loop in her mind. She had crossed a line she'd sworn to herself she wouldn't. Mark's voice called from the kitchen. "Coffee's ready. I thought we could take a walk after breakfast." Her stomach churned at the thought of facing him. "Coming," she replied, her voice too bright. Breakfast tension. At the breakfast table, Mark was his usual self, cheery and full of plans for the day. He talked about the snorkeling trip, recounting a moment when a sea turtle swam by, and how he wished Olivia had been there. "You really missed out," he said, his eyes warm with affection. "Maybe we can go together before we leave." Olivia forced a smile. "Maybe." Mark paused, tilting his head as he studied her. "Are you okay? You've seemed distracted lately." "I'm fine," Olivia replied quickly, her voice sharper than she intended. "Just tired." Mark frowned but didn't push. "All right, let me know if there's anything I can do." Guilt wrapped around Olivia like a vice. Mark's kindness only made her feel worse. She had betrayed him in a way he couldn't even imagine, and the weight of her secret was suffocating. Ryan's persistent presence. Later that day, Olivia tried to avoid Ryan, keeping to herself and skipping the usual resort activities. But as she lounged by the pool with a book, she felt his presence before she saw him. "Hey, stranger," Ryan said, dropping into the chair next to hers. "You disappeared after the bonfire." "I needed some space," Olivia replied, her tone clipped. She kept her eyes on her book, though the words blurred before her. "Come on," Ryan said, his voice playful. "Don't tell me you regret last night." She turned to face him, her heart pounding. "Ryan, whatever this is, it can't happen again." Ryan leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at his lips. "You keep saying that, but you keep showing up." "I mean it," Olivia said, standing abruptly. "This has to stop." As she walked away, she felt his eyes on her, the intensity of his gaze unsettling. She told herself she had done the right thing, but a part of her wasn't so sure. A whisper of suspicion. That evening, Olivia and Mark attended a group dinner hosted by the resort. The long table was filled with laughter and chatter, the glow of lanterns casting a warm light over the guests. Olivia felt on edge, hyper-aware of Ryan's presence as he moved around the gathering, joking with guests and staff alike. At one point, Mark noticed her distraction. "You've been quiet tonight," he said, concern lacing his voice. I'm just tired, Olivia replied, her go-to excuse. But Mark wasn't convinced. His gaze lingered on her for a moment before shifting to Ryan, who was laughing with a group nearby. Something in Mark's expression darkened, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. An unexpected confrontation. The next morning, as Olivia returned to the villa from an early yoga session, she found Mark waiting for her on the patio. His arms were crossed, his expression serious. "Can we talk?" he asked. Olivia's heart sank. "Of course. What's wrong?" Mark hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I've been noticing things. The way you've been distant, the way you seem distracted. And last night, I saw how Ryan looked at you." Olivia's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "I don't know," Mark admitted, his voice tight with emotion. "But something feels off. Are you? Is there something you're not telling me?" She froze, torn between denial and confession. The truth hovered on the edge of her lips, but the fear of destroying what little was left of their marriage held her back. "You're imagining things," she said finally, her voice unsteady. "There's nothing going on." Mark studied her, his eyes filled with doubt. "I hope you're right." A fragile piece. For the next few days, Olivia walked on eggshells, her interactions with Ryan reduced to polite nods in passing. Mark seemed to accept her reassurance, though the tension between them lingered. She told herself she could salvage their marriage, that if she distanced herself from Ryan, things could return to normal. But deep down, Olivia knew the cracks were widening. The weight of her secret was too great to bear, and it was only a matter of time before the facade she had built came crashing down. The rain came unexpectedly that evening, drumming against the villa's roof in steady rhythm. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. She hadn't slept well in days, the tension between her and Mark hanging over her like a storm cloud. Mark, oblivious to her turmoil, was in the living room, organizing brochures for their final excursions before leaving the resort. The cheerful, vibrant images of snorkeling trips and sunset cruises felt cruelly out of place in the suffocating atmosphere. A careless whisper. It was supposed to be a simple dinner with Lisa and her husband, Eric, who had joined them at the resort for the last leg of their trip. Olivia had been dreading it, knowing Lisa had always been perceptive. Their friendship had been strained since Olivia's restlessness began to seep into her interactions. The meal started with polite conversation, Lisa chatting about the spa treatments and Eric recounting his mishap with a stubborn jet ski. Olivia tried to focus, but her mind kept drifting to the shadowy secrets she had buried. Then it happened. Lisa, a glass of wine in hand, leaned toward Mark with a mischievous grin. "You know, Olivia was quite the star during the bonfire night. She and Ryan." Olivia's fork clattered against her plate, the sound sharp and jarring. "Lisa," she said, her voice tinged with panic. Lisa blinked, confused. "What? It's nothing. You two were just talking." But it was clear "Lisa, that's enough," Olivia snapped, her voice trembling. The table fell silent, the air thick with unspoken tension. Mark set his fork down slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Who's Ryan?" "The dam breaks." The walk back to the villa was silent. Mark's expression was unreadable. His jaw clenched as he pushed the door open. Olivia followed, her heart pounding. "Who's Ryan?" Mark asked again, his voice low but firm. "He's just one of the resort staff," Olivia replied, avoiding his gaze. "He organizes activities. That's all." Mark crossed his arms, his eyes searching hers. "And why does Lisa think there's more to it than that?" "There's nothing to it," Olivia said, her voice rising. "Lisa just misunderstood." Mark's lips pressed into a thin line. "Are you lying to me?" The words hung in the air like a guillotine. Olivia froze, caught between fear and guilt. She wanted to deny it, to bury the truth deeper, but Mark's steady gaze left her no room to escape. "Yes," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. "I lied." The confession. Mark sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. "How far did it go?" he asked, his voice cracking. Olivia hesitated, tears brimming in her eyes. "It was just a kiss," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, they felt hollow. "It didn't mean anything." Mark looked at her, his face a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "You're telling me you kissed someone else while we're supposed to be fixing our marriage? And it didn't mean anything?" "It was a mistake," Olivia pleaded. "I wasn't thinking." Stop," Mark said, holding up a hand. "I don't want to hear excuses. I just want to know why." "I don't know," Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. "I felt so disconnected, so lost. It wasn't about him, it was about me. I'm sorry." Mark stood, pacing the room. His emotions seemed to war between fury and despair. "I trusted you, Olivia. I've been trying to hold this together. And you—" "I know," Olivia interrupted, her voice breaking. "I know I broke that trust. But please, Mark, it didn't mean anything. I want to fix this." Mark stopped, his back to her. When he turned, his face was calm, but his eyes were cold. "I don't know if there's anything left to fix." The beginning of the end. The rest of the night passed in silence, the air in the villa thick with unresolved pain. Mark slept on the couch, leaving Olivia alone in the bedroom with her thoughts. By morning, it was clear the fracture in their relationship was irreparable. Mark barely spoke to her, his responses clipped and distant. He spent the day away from the villa, leaving Olivia to grapple with the weight of her actions. That evening, he returned with a suitcase in hand. "I'm moving to another room," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "I need some space." Olivia nodded, her throat too tight to speak. As she watched him leave, the finality of his departure hit her like a wave. She had gambled with their marriage, and now she was losing everything. Mark sat on the edge of the bed in his new room, staring blankly at the plain, impersonal decor. The vibrant paintings of tropical scenes, meant to evoke relaxation, only deepened his sense of disorientation. It had been a week since Olivia's confession, and the initial storm of his emotions had settled into a cold, heavy numbness. He had moved out of their shared villa not because he wanted to avoid her, but because he needed clarity, space to think without the constant reminder of her betrayal. Yet, the silence of this new room seemed louder than any argument they could have had. Conversations with Derek. Mark's phone buzzed. It was Derek, his oldest friend and a steady presence in his life. He had called Derek the night Olivia admitted the kiss, needing someone to confide in. Derek, pragmatic as ever, had listened without interrupting, offering calm advice. "What's the latest?" Derek asked when Mark picked up. Mark sighed heavily. "I've moved into a separate room. I can't stand being in the same space with her right now." "Understandable," Derek said. "But have you thought about what you're going to do next? Are you staying with her or walking away?" "That's the problem," Mark replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "I don't know. Part of me thinks we can get past this, but another part wonders if this was just the final straw." There was a pause before Derek spoke. "Mark, you deserve honesty, and you deserve loyalty. If she's crossed those lines now, you need to decide if that's something you can truly forgive, or if it's just going to eat away at you." Mark nodded silently, though Derek couldn't see him. He knew his friend was right, but the path forward felt impossibly unclear. The unexpected encounter. In an effort to clear his head, Mark decided to join a guided hiking group organized by the resort. The fresh air and physical exertion helped dull the sharp edges of his thoughts. As the group wound their way up a forested hill, Mark found himself walking beside a woman he hadn't seen before. "First time on this hike?" she asked, her tone friendly. "Yeah," Mark replied, his voice flat. "Needed a distraction." She smiled sympathetically. "Sounds like you've got a lot on your mind. I'm Emma, by the way." "Mark," he said, managing a small smile. They continued hiking together, their conversation light and easy. Emma spoke about her love for travel, her recent decision to leave a corporate job that had been draining her, and her own journey of rediscovering herself after a rough breakup. There was no pretense, no pressure, just the refreshing simplicity of talking to someone who understood pain without judgment. By the time the hike ended, Mark felt lighter. Emma's openness had been a balm for his frayed emotions, though he wasn't sure what it meant for him. An awkward dinner. That evening, Mark was invited to a resort dinner for solo travelers. He hesitated at first, but the idea of being surrounded by strangers felt easier than facing Olivia. When he arrived, he was surprised to see Emma already seated at the table. "Looks like we're destined to keep crossing paths," she joked, gesturing for him to join her. The meal was lively, with laughter and stories exchanged among the group. Emma's humor and warmth stood out, her ability to make others feel at ease reminding Mark of what had been missing in his life for so long. For the first time in weeks, he found himself laughing, the tightness in his chest loosening, even if only temporarily. A growing resolve. By the time Mark returned to his room, a new clarity had begun to form. His interactions with Emma had reminded him of what he valued most in relationships: honesty, respect, and a shared sense of purpose. While he wasn't sure if his connection with Emma would lead anywhere, it had opened his eyes to what he had been missing in his marriage with Olivia. The next morning, Mark requested a meeting with a counselor provided by the resort. He wanted to work through his feelings with someone impartial, someone who could help him navigate the difficult decisions ahead. "I don't know if I can forgive her," Mark admitted during the session. "Even if I try, I don't know if the trust can ever come back." The counselor nodded thoughtfully. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or condoning. It's about deciding whether you're willing to rebuild, and if both of you are truly committed to that process." Mark left the session feeling steadier, though his path forward was still fraught with uncertainty. He knew one thing for sure: he couldn't continue in limbo. A decision had to be made. A letter to Olivia. That evening, Mark sat at the small desk in his room, pen in hand. He had spent the day reflecting, and now he needed to put his thoughts into words. He began to write, "Olivia, I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything that's happened and where we go from here. I want to be honest with you, the way we promised to be with each other when we got married. Your actions hurt me deeply, not just because of the kiss but because of what it represents. It feels like we lost something along the way, and I don't know if we can get it back. I need time to figure out what's best for me. I hope you can use this time to reflect, too. No matter what happens, I hope we can both find peace and happiness, even if it's apart. Mark." As he folded the letter and sealed it in an envelope, Mark felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't closure, but it was a step toward it. The envelope sat on the villa's dining table, a small but imposing object that seemed to radiate tension. Olivia had spotted it when she returned from a late afternoon walk along the beach. Her name was written neatly on the front in Mark's handwriting, and even before she opened it, she knew it wasn't good news. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. With every line, her stomach churned, her chest tightening as the weight of Mark's words sank in. His pain was palpable, and his decision to step back felt like the first crack in the foundation of a life she had taken for granted. When she finished reading, Olivia sat down heavily, staring at the letter as tears filled her eyes. She knew she had pushed him away, but seeing it laid out in black and white was unbearable. She had broken something precious, something she wasn't sure could ever be repaired. Seeking solace. That evening, Olivia called Lisa. It had been days since their awkward dinner, and Olivia wasn't sure how her friend would respond. When Lisa answered, her voice was cautious. "Olivia," Lisa said, "I wasn't sure I'd hear from you." "I need to talk," Olivia said, her voice cracking. "I've messed everything up." There was a long pause before Lisa replied, "Come over. We'll talk." When Olivia arrived at Lisa's room, she was greeted with a mixture of concern and restrained frustration. Lisa poured them both a glass of wine and gestured for Olivia to sit. "Start from the beginning," Lisa said. "Tell me everything." And so Olivia did. She talked about her restlessness, the growing distance between her and Mark, and her ill-fated connection with Ryan. She admitted to the kiss and the guilt that had consumed her ever since. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what's wrong with me. Lisa sighed, her expression softening. Olivia, I've known you for years. You've always been searching for something, but you can't keep sabotaging the good things in your life because you feel restless. Mark doesn't deserve this. And honestly, neither do you. I know, Olivia whispered, but I don't know how to fix it. A hollow apology. The next morning, Olivia decided to find Mark. She couldn't let his letter be the final word. She needed to apologize, to try to explain herself in a way she hadn't been able to before. She found him on the beach, sitting alone on a weathered bench that faced the ocean. His shoulders were hunched, and his expression was unreadable as he stared out at the horizon. "Mark," Olivia said softly as she approached. He turned to look at her, his face guarded but not unkind. "I got your letter," she began, sitting down beside him. I want to say I'm sorry. For everything. For betraying your trust. For being distant. For not appreciating you the way I should have." Mark didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "I believe you're sorry, Olivia, but I don't know if that changes anything." "It can change," she said, her voice pleading. "We can work through this. I know we can." Mark shook his head, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "It's not that simple. Forgiveness doesn't undo what's been done. And honestly, I don't know if I have it in me to try again." Spiraling into solitude. Mark's words haunted Olivia long after their conversation ended. She returned to the villa feeling hollow, the reality of her situation pressing down on her with unbearable weight. She tried to distract herself with small tasks, folding clothes, flipping through TV channels, scrolling aimlessly on her phone. But nothing could shake the ache in her chest. Her thoughts turned to Ryan, though she knew deep down that was a dead end. She hadn't seen him much since that night at the bonfire, and even if she had, his disinterest in anything serious had been painfully clear. She had gambled her marriage on a fleeting connection that had evaporated the moment reality intruded. Her loneliness grew, compounded by the loss of Mark's steady presence. She realized too late how much she had relied on him, not just as a husband but as an anchor. Without him, she felt adrift, uncertain of how to rebuild her life. A small step forward. One evening, as the villa grew dark and quiet, Olivia sat down at the small writing desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. She wasn't sure what she hoped to accomplish, but the act of writing felt like the only way to process her swirling emotions. "Mark, I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want you to know that I'm trying to understand myself better, why I made the choices I did, why I let us drift apart. You've always been the better half of us, the steady one, and I'm so sorry I didn't see that until it was too late. I don't know what the future holds, but I hope you find happiness, even if it's not with me. You deserve that, Olivia." She folded the letter and set it aside, unsure if she'd ever give it to him. For now, it was enough to have written it. The villa felt emptier than ever as Mark sat on the balcony, staring out at the ocean. The waves lapped rhythmically against the shore, but their soothing sound barely registered. Olivia's letter rested on the table beside him, unopened. He had found it earlier that evening when he returned from a solitary walk. For hours, he had resisted reading it, afraid of what it might say. Would it be another plea for forgiveness? Another attempt to mend what had been broken? Or would it simply confirm the growing realization that their marriage had run its course? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in hues of amber and gold, Mark picked up the letter and unfolded it. Olivia's handwriting was familiar, her words carefully chosen yet raw with emotion, reflecting on the past. By the time he finished reading, Mark's emotions were in turmoil. Olivia's letter was heartfelt and honest, but it also reminded him of how far they had drifted from the life they once envisioned. He thought about the early days of their relationship, the way they used to laugh over shared jokes, the late-night conversations about dreams and plans. Somewhere along the way, those moments had been replaced by silence, by routine, by a slow but steady erosion of connection. Mark knew he wasn't without fault. He had grown complacent, assuming that stability was enough to sustain their marriage. He had missed the signs of Olivia's restlessness, dismissing them as passing moods instead of deeper discontent. But her betrayal, the kiss with Ryan, had shattered something fundamental. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily repaired. Seeking guidance. The following morning, Mark called Derek. His friend had been a steadfast source of support through the ordeal, offering advice without judgment. "I got a letter from Olivia," Mark said when Derek answered. "And?" Derek asked. "It's complicated," Mark admitted. "She's sorry. She wants to fix things. But I don't know if I can. I don't even know if I want to." Derek was quiet for a moment. "Mark, no one can make this decision for you. But ask yourself this. Can you imagine a future with her that doesn't feel weighed down by what happened? Can you rebuild something that feels real and lasting? If not, you might already have your answer." Mark nodded, even though Derek couldn't see him. "Thanks," he said. "I needed to hear that." An encounter with Emma. That evening, Mark ran into Emma at the resort's cafe. She was seated by the window, sipping coffee and sketching in a notebook. When she saw him, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Hey," she said, gesturing to the seat across from her. "Join me?" Mark hesitated for only a moment before sitting down. Emma's presence had become a comfort, her conversations a reprieve from the chaos of his emotions. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind," she said, closing her notebook. "I do," Mark admitted. "It's been a rough few weeks." Emma nodded, her expression empathetic. "I won't pry, but if you need to talk, I'm here." For the next hour, they talked about everything except Olivia. Emma told stories about her travels, her love for art, and the lessons she had learned from her own painful breakup. Her openness was refreshing, her perspective offering Mark a glimpse of what life could look like beyond the pain. As they parted ways, Emma placed a hand on his arm. "Take care of yourself, Mark. Whatever you decide, make sure it's what's best for you." A decision made. That night, Mark sat on the balcony again. The stars scattered across the sky like a map of possibilities. He thought about Olivia's letter, Derek's advice, and Emma's quiet encouragement. The weight of his decision felt immense, but he knew he couldn't stay in limbo any longer. The next morning, Mark met Olivia at the beach. She was sitting on the same bench where they had last spoken, her posture tense as she watched him approach. He sat beside her, the silence between them heavy but not hostile. "I read your letter," Mark began, his voice steady. "I appreciate your honesty, and I know you're sorry, but I've had a lot of time to think, and I've come to a decision." Olivia turned to him, her eyes filled with hope and fear. "What is it?" Mark took a deep breath. "I think we need to let each other go. I don't think we can rebuild what's been broken, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life holding on to resentment or doubt. We deserve a chance to move forward, even if it's not together." Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks, but she nodded. "I understand," she said softly. "I'll always regret what I did, but I want you to be happy, even if it's without me." For the first time in weeks, Mark felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew this was the right choice. Mark stood at the edge of the resort's terrace, the ocean breeze tugging at his shirt and carrying with it the scent of salt and freedom. The sun was rising, painting the horizon in shades of pink and gold. It felt like a symbolic end to one chapter of his life and the tentative beginning of another. He had spent the last few days reflecting, giving Olivia the space to begin her own process of letting go. Their conversation on the beach had been painful, but it had also brought clarity. For the first time in years, Mark felt as though he could breathe without the weight of unresolved tension pressing down on him. A goodbye to the past. The morning of his departure from the resort was quiet. Olivia had opted to leave a day earlier, sparing them the awkwardness of crossing paths again. She left a short note in his villa, her words filled with regret but also a hint of understanding. "Mark, thank you for being honest with me. I'll carry the lessons of this experience with me as I figure out my next steps. I hope you find the happiness you deserve. Olivia ***. Mark folded the note and tucked it into his suitcase, not out of sentimentality but as a reminder of the growth he hoped would come from this experience. For both of them. A chance encounter. On the flight home, Mark found himself seated next to an older man who introduced himself as Thomas. They struck up a conversation that began with small talk about the resort but soon delved into deeper topics. "Life is funny," Thomas said, swirling the ice in his whiskey glass. "We spend so much time trying to make things work, but sometimes the best thing we can do is let go." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I'm learning. Letting go isn't failure. It's making room for something new." Thomas smiled, his expression kind. "Exactly. And you'll find that once you do, the world has a way of surprising you." The words stayed with Mark as the plane landed. He wasn't sure what surprises awaited him, but he felt ready to face them. Reconnecting with the present. Back home, Mark eased into his new reality. He moved into a smaller apartment, one that felt more suited to his current life. It wasn't extravagant, but it was his, and the act of creating a space for himself felt empowering. He threw himself into his work but also made time for things he had neglected. He joined a local boxing gym, finding catharsis in the physicality of the sport. He reconnected with old friends, spending evenings laughing over beers and stories, rediscovering the camaraderie he had missed. A new friendship. Emma reached out a few weeks after the resort. Her text was casual but warm. "Hey, Mark. Hope you're settling back into life. Let me know if you ever want to grab a coffee." Mark hesitated for a moment before typing a reply. "I'd like that. How about this weekend?" They met at a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street. Emma's presence was as comforting as he remembered, uncomplicated and genuine. They talked about their transitions, their goals, and the lessons they had learned from their respective heartbreaks. "I'm not rushing into anything," Emma said, her smile tinged with caution. "But it's nice to meet someone who gets it." Mark nodded, his own smile reflecting her sentiment. No pressure, no expectations. Just good company. As they parted ways, Mark felt something he hadn't in a long time. A quiet sense of hope. Looking ahead. Months passed, and Mark continued to rebuild. His life wasn't perfect, but it was his, and he took pride in the progress he was making. Olivia's absence was no longer a sharp pain but a distant ache, a reminder of a chapter that had shaped him but no longer defined him. One evening, as he stood on his apartment's balcony, watching the city lights twinkle, Mark thought about Thomas's words on the plane. Letting go had been the hardest thing he'd ever done, but it had also been the most freeing. His phone buzzed with a message from Emma. "What's your favorite kind of food? Thinking about where we should go next time." Smiley face. Mark smiled as he typed a reply. The future felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to embrace it. The scent of fresh rain lingered in the air as Mark walked through the park, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. Spring had arrived, and the trees were bursting with blossoms, their colors vibrant against the backdrop of a pale blue sky. He had come here to think, as he often did, letting the tranquility of nature guide his thoughts. It had been 6 months since he and Olivia had parted ways. The wounds of their separation, while not entirely healed, had begun to fade into scars, marks of growth and lessons learned. A letter from Olivia. That morning, Mark had received an unexpected letter from Olivia. Her handwriting on the envelope brought a rush of emotions, nostalgia, sadness, and a trace of curiosity. As he sat on a park bench, he unfolded the letter and began to read. "Mark, I hope this letter finds you well. I've spent the past few months reflecting on everything, on us, on the mistakes I made, and on what I've learned since. I wanted you to know that I've started therapy, and it's helping me understand why I felt so restless and why I made the choices I did. I'll always regret the pain I caused you, but I also want to thank you for your honesty and strength. Letting go was the right decision for both of us, even if it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I hope you found peace and happiness, and that your life is filled with the love and joy you deserve. Take care, Olivia." Mark folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. He felt no anger, no bitterness, only a quiet sense of closure. Olivia's words were sincere, and he was glad to know she was working toward understanding herself. Their story had ended, but it had shaped them both in ways they were still discovering. Emma's encouragement. That evening, Mark met Emma for dinner. Their friendship had deepened over the months, evolving into something more meaningful. They took things slowly, both mindful of the scars they carried, but their connection was undeniable. Over pasta and wine, Emma noticed the pensive look on Mark's face. "You seem thoughtful tonight," she said, her tone light but curious. "I got a letter from Olivia," Mark admitted. He explained its contents, watching Emma's expression shift from concern to understanding. "How do you feel about it?" she asked. "Relieved," Mark replied after a moment. "It's like the last piece of the puzzle. I can move forward now without wondering about the what-ifs." Emma reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You've come a long way, Mark. It's not easy to let go of something you've built your life around. But you did it, and now you're building something new." Mark smiled, her words resonating deeply. For the first time, he truly felt the weight of the past lift from his shoulders. Embracing the future. As the weeks turned into months, Mark's life continued to take shape. He advanced at work, finding fulfillment in new challenges. His friendships flourished, strengthened by the support and laughter of those who had stood by him. And his relationship with Emma grew steadily, built on trust and mutual respect. One sunny afternoon, Mark and Emma returned to the park where he had read Olivia's letter. They strolled through the gardens, pausing by a fountain where children played and couples sat hand in hand. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" Emma asked, her gaze fixed on the rippling water. "All the time," Mark said, smiling. "But it's not just about how far I've come. It's about where I'm going." Emma looked at him, her eyes warm. "And where's that?" Mark took a deep breath, letting the moment settle. "Wherever life takes me. As long as I'm living authentically, with purpose, I know I'll be okay." A life reclaimed. That evening, Mark stood on his balcony, watching the city lights twinkle like stars. He thought about the man he had been at the beginning of this journey. Uncertain, heartbroken, and lost. He was still the same man in many ways, but stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. Life hadn't turned out the way he had planned, but in its unpredictability, it had offered him something greater, the chance to rebuild, to grow, and to love again. As the night deepened, Mark raised a glass to the skyline, a quiet toast to the chapters that had ended and the stories still waiting to be written. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.